Good afternoon. It's kind of the post-lunch lull that always hits. My name is Eric Brown. I work with UKTI Investment in New York. I cover the U.S. education market. A little bit about me. My background is from training. I used to be in the training industry and sales training in a previous life, but now, subsequently, I'm now working with education and training companies from the UK looking to come over to the States. So I thought first and foremost, I'd start out just to find out a little bit more about what you guys do, what you work with. So if we just raise of hands, who here works with higher ed? Okay, primary, secondary? Okay. And then training? Okay, so basically, what is higher, okay. So this is mainly going to focus on primary through secondary school. We'll touch on some higher ed for a little bit, and then anything training related we can discuss offline because it's more around the traditional, if you would, education areas. So just a little background in terms of education market in the US. Primary and secondary education, typically in the States we refer to as K through 12. K standing for kindergarten, and then the 12 being 12th grade, which is our highest level of high school, which is the highest level of secondary education in the States. There are 125,000 schools in the country. With those 125,000 schools are broken up into approximately 15,000 districts. So those districts are the key ones, the more well-known ones: New York, LA, Chicago, Miami-Dade County, and Clark County, which is also better known as Las Vegas. That's where Las Vegas is. Those districts are typically districts that most companies are looking at when they're looking to come over to the US. They think, okay, we want to go to New York, we want to go to LA. Those are cities we know, those are cities we hear about. The problem is the larger districts, those are the ones that every company in the US usually wants to go after. And the top 200 districts in the country are the ones that 80% of the companies that sell into education focus on. That's who they do their marketing to. The tricky part is a majority of the students in the country really are not going to, obviously they have the large populations of students, but a majority of the kids in the country are spread out amongst the smaller districts throughout the country that usually are probably anywhere from 2,500 to 5,000 students. So obviously we also have an extensive private school network, but unlike public schools, private schools are going to receive their funding mostly from either endowments or from tuition that they charge to the families that are attending. And while it's nice to sell to them because of the fact that most of the decision makers are in one house, what's difficult is the fact that it's one-off. You're going to sell to one school, you might get that one deal, but that's not really going to help in terms of selling to a district where you might be able to get 6, 7, or in the case of a district like New York, over 1,000 schools. So the funding from schools. Oftentimes when I talk with UK companies about the US market, they tend to think that schools in the States are getting a lot of their money from the federal government. When they hear about the different programs that the federal government in the US is putting together, they think that that's where the money's going to come from. What it really is that a majority of that funding is coming from the local and the state governments. About 45% from the state government, and another possibly 40%, give or take, depending on the state, is coming from the local government. Most of that money is generated from property taxes. The remaining percentage, again, it's going to give or take depending on which state it is going to come what's left over from federal funding. So majority of the decision making for getting into schools in the US is going to be either at the state or at the district level. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a couple minutes. So most of the schools are going to rely, obviously, on that funding that's going to come from their local and their state levels. So obviously when we had the economic downturn a few years ago, when property values went down, the revenue from taxes went down. Schools weren't getting as much money as they had been in the past. Now things are starting to turn around. The funding is there in schools in the States, and now we're seeing that schools are spending more than they were the last few years, but not where they were prior to the downturn. So how is it important and relevant to companies like yourselves that want to sell into the schools in the US? Unfortunately, there's no set, okay, this is your route to market, this is exactly what you're going to do. It's going to vary depending on what part of the country you're targeting, depending on what state, depending on what city, depending on what district. There are parts of this in the US where you might say one particular state, let's take for instance, Ohio. In Cleveland, which is one of the major cities in Ohio, you might say sell and have a sales model, or you're focusing to one person. But in Cincinnati, which is another major city in the state, the target and the person you talk to and that title and that individual doesn't even exist. It's someone completely different that has a completely different role, but they're the decision maker, they're the key person for you to be able to work with and to talk to. So it becomes tricky in terms of knowing, okay, how are we going to approach the market? What's going to be the focus in terms of selling to X school as opposed to Y school? And then how subsequently are you going to be able to then manage, okay, I know these are the people I need to talk to in Cleveland, these are the people I need to talk to in Cincinnati. So one of the things that is typically universal amongst all schools is you have an approved vendor list. The approved vendor lists are basically, it's a list of, like it says, schools that have, or excuse me, companies that have applied to the school district to sell their product, whatever it might be. They're on the approved list. They're companies that once the contracts are up and they're looking for something new, the school is most likely going to say, okay, I like this product. They've got a good deal for us. You're now allowed to bid for the money that's available or allotted for this particular product. The most of the decision-making time is, we're actually getting close to some of the peak decision-making time, starting in March, April, May. Basically what it is, it's the springtime which leads into the end of the fiscal year for the school year. Most school years, it's a June 30th to July 1st year. Sorry, the year begins July 1st, ends June 30th. So this time of the year in the spring, when it's March, April, May time, that's when schools are most likely to be making decisions on the new products that they're going to be going with. Obviously now, when you're sitting back in January, you're probably preparing what your approach is going to be for that spring launch. You probably actually have already got it prepared. Now you're just putting the final touches on it to get whatever kind of marketing that you're going to do to the schools in place for the spring decision-making time. The thing about schools and when you're doing your marketing is they don't want to hear a sales pitch. They want some kind of partner to work with. They want someone that's going to come in there and they're going to help them with solving some kind of problem, some kind of issue that they're working with, because typically, as I'm sure you're seeing with schools that you work with here in the UK, the mindset's a little bit different. It's not like you're selling B2B and just everybody's about what kind of profit they can generate, et cetera, like that. School teachers are about helping kids and making our future better and brighter. So you want to be someone that can be a partner for schools to be able to do that. And that comes in a couple of different ways in terms of obviously being able to let them know that you can help them solve a problem, but also in terms of being there for them afterwards. One of the things we'll talk about in a couple of minutes is the fact that sometimes companies will come in with a product, they sell it to a school, they walk away to the next school, and that's it. And the school's left with this product that might be a fantastic product, but they don't know how to use it. It starts collecting dust. So some of the issues often at times that schools see from vendors, they don't take the time to ask teachers what they need. A lot of times companies will come in, they'll go to the school, they'll say, we have X, we think it would help you for this, that's it. Not, what's the issue that you have right now? Okay, well here's how we can help you solve that issue. The one-size-fits-all solution in terms of thinking they can put in a product into the school, everybody will be able to use it. That's not the case. You need to be able to tweak it and to put it in a situation where your product is one that is fitting specific needs for the school. The school wants to be able to feel like you're really, like I said, that partner that's helping them to solve a problem as opposed to that company that's coming to sell them a product. Training, and this is one of the key things about obviously the lasting relationship that you have with schools, making sure the schools know how your product works. If they don't know how it works, they're not going to use it. They might, it may be a fantastic product, and it may be easy, obviously, from your perspective. Oh, I know how this works. This is easy. But you'd be surprised, yes, they are teachers, but sometimes they do need to be taught and be told things and be explained how to use a product. So make sure you have in mind, obviously, the training to teach teachers how to use it, but then subsequently the support in place to follow up with the questions that inevitably will come from the teachers when something doesn't work the way it's supposed to, or when and it's more of a user error in terms of them not fully understanding what they were trained on. Another thing is that sometimes they talk down to teachers, I should say teachers as opposed to teams, down to teachers like something's wrong with them. They basically treat it as if, oh, you know what, you're failing at getting students to pass X test, or your graduation rate is not the level it should have been. And then the teachers feel like, all right, well, now you're attacking me with this great product that you're coming at me with, but not really telling me about how you can help me. Again, it all goes back to finding a way to help the schools, make them feel like you're working with them, like you're helping them to solve a problem. So some of the key things about the education market, like I said, there's no uniformity around it. So you're sitting from the UK perspective, trying to look at the US and how you're going to sell it. Let's say you have something that helps with math, or it helps with English, or it helps with science. What are the ways that you can adapt what you have to what is being sold in the States? The Common Core Standards is a new standard that basically in 2012, it was devised and agreed that we being Americans, need to come up with a system that makes things more universal amongst education in terms of how we teach math, how we teach science, how we teach English, how we teach social sciences. The keys being the math and the reading and literacy being the keys in terms of getting it a universal level across the country. Because with all the diversity that we have with the education in the States, one of the issues we run into is the fact that some states are much better in education than others. And they wanted to basically balance out that gap and make it universal across the country. One of the issues with that is obviously the states that were much better and achieved higher, in a way they've had to lower some of their standards to meet this new mean that's been created. So some states are going up, some states are going down. But a majority of the US is now tied into the Common Core. It's still being implemented in a slow rollout with a few states here, every couple of years. So probably by 2020, a majority of the states that are a part of it will be fully on board with it. Those states here, Texas, Alaska, Nebraska, Montana, Virginia, Puerto Rico is not a state, but it is a territory of the US, and the education changes do affect it. They have not adopted the Common Core. Texas, I would say, most likely, to be fair, probably never will. They tend to, when it comes to education, Texas is its own country. And we could talk about that a little bit later or offline. But these other states probably, I don't think they're ever going to adopt the Common Core either. But still, as you see what states are not there, so some of the major states in terms of population, New York, California, Florida, they are adopting it. A lot of the major school districts that are in the country are obviously in those states. A lot of the population of the country is in those states. So there's plenty of schools to work with when you still have a majority of the countries adopted the Common Core. The tricky part about the Common Core is that, and one thing, I don't want to say it's a negative, but one thing that you keep in mind is that the US government, as it changes, as it evolves, it goes in trends around education. So right now the Common Core is huge, obviously under the current administration. But what might happen is in 2016, under a new president, maybe things are changed. Maybe the Common Core is stepped away from. Maybe they don't have the support at the federal level to keep instituting it, and they implement another plan. There's always some kind of different plans or different programs that are being looked at that obviously under different politicians and different political campaigns, it may not even be something that's at the political level, the presidential level, but maybe even at the state government level with different governors that are saying, you know what, we're wiping our hands of the Common Core, we're just going to go with my state doing things my way. But as of right now, the Common Core is going to be in place, and from the UK perspective, it makes things easier in terms of how you can adapt what you're offering, instead of having to look at, okay, can we come up with 50 different models to match 50 different state requirements? Now we can look at, okay, in certain aspects, we can now go with one system that's going to work for the whole of the country. Touching on the higher education side of things, we have 4,000 colleges, universities in the US. One thing that you'll find when you're talking to Americans, the word college is used interchangeably. So we're referring to Harvard could be referred to, even though it's the most prestigious university in the US, Harvard is referred to as a college. Yale is referred to as a college. It's just one word that I know here, sometimes college can refer to schools that we might oftentimes consider vocational schools, but in the US, it just refers to anything, any institution of higher education typically is referred under the blanket term college, although we still would say university as well. 4,000 in the US, both public and private. Obviously the Harvards, the Yales are private institutions. Public institutions would be along the lines of the University of Michigan, Michigan State, UCLA. Those are ones that are actually state colleges. My alma mater, University of Albany in upstate New York. Those are state institutions. Now, we have the difference, you see the 2-year and the 4-year. What we mean by that is that we have community colleges, which basically provide what we call an associate's degree. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say less than, it's not as extensive a degree program as a bachelor's degree. The 4-year institutions are typically the ones that are awarding a minimum a bachelor's. Obviously, also, they would offer, many of them will offer postgraduate programs. And again, like I said, the word college is used to refer to both colleges and universities. The key with college, and I didn't touch on it too much because I wasn't sure what the breakdown of higher ed versus primary and secondary education companies that would be here. But the key with selling to college, it's a little bit, in a way it's a little bit easier, but still an issue in terms of obviously fully understanding it, because when you're selling into higher education, most of the decision makers are in-house for the most part. Even with the state universities, depending on what your product or service is, those decision makers are all right in that school. You don't have to go to the actual state board offices and say, okay, here's our product, can we get it into that school? You can go to the individual schools and sell it off that way. Obviously, the private institutions, you're able to sell directly to them as well. I think one of the keys about higher education in the States as opposed to higher education in other countries is that higher education is also more of a, in a way, a business in itself, in terms of the fact that it's an industry where schools get themselves out there, they put themselves out there, they market themselves out there in multiple ways. One of the things that oftentimes UK colleges and universities that I talk to ask me, how do we get more students? How do we attract more students? And I said the one issue that you have in higher ed is that when you're trying to attract more students, American colleges and universities are on television playing sports every weekend, or even when college basketball is going on, almost every night. So those schools get free advertising in a way for, here's my school, University of Notre Dame, famous for football. But it's a high level, very prestigious university, but they attract tons of students because of how popular their football program is. Duke University for basketball, the University of North Carolina, again, for basketball. A lot of colleges and universities are multi-billion-dollar institutions because of what they use in terms of generating revenue, generating interest from the sports side. Purchasing and funding, again, like I said, I touched about a little bit. The funding in public education as in private, now you're looking at tuition. Unlike when you're going to public school in the primary and secondary, in higher ed, obviously, you're having to pay tuition. Tuitions in public schools are lower than they would be in a private school for in-state individuals. So for instance, myself being born and raised in New York, I pay less tuition to go to a college or a university in the state of New York than if I went to one in New Jersey, to California, in Texas, and Florida, and then vice versa. Depending on which state you live in or you're a resident of, you get a discount in terms of the college tuition. College tuitions overall, though, however, at either level, private or public, are much higher in the States than they are typically in universities here. Endowments are another source of revenue that the schools are getting, and then how they're funded. And then typically the purchasing is done, they have procurement offices that basically play that role that the district procurement offices obviously would do, but on the individual school basis. Again, depending on what it is that you're providing, who your decision maker is for purchasing that is going to vary.